いらっしゃ。お主か。
And with that greeting from the waitress who shall remain forever anonymous, welcome back, adventurers, once again to Let's Play ChäoS Child. In the last episode, Takuru received not one but two rounds of rather unsettling news. The first was from Mio Kunasato, informing him that there has been a new victim in the Return of the New Generation Madness serial killings on account of Kurusu surviving Serika's assault at Herkyo Academy. Much to Takuru's surprise, and if I'm being honest, mine, is the fact that the victim in this case is none other than Wataru Sakuma himself. Yeah. Don't know what to say there other than the fact that clearly Serika may or may not have gotten bored of collaborating with Sakuma behind the scenes and just decided to kill him outright in order to keep events moving along for the sake of Takuru's entertainment. But that brings us to the second round of bad news, which was from Detective Shinjo, basically saying that in the wake of Sakuma's murder, Takuru, Kurusu, Yuto, and Uki will no longer be able to stay at Aoba Dorm, as Sakuma, in his guise as a mild-mannered physician, accrued quite a bit of debt, which basically means that the building in question is pretty much going to be repossessed and then resold to somebody else, which means that Takuru needs to find the others a place to stay because, well, he can't live with them in the trailer in Miyashita Park now, can he? Silver lining to this is the fact that Momose of Freesia Investigations was able to find some sort of alternative accommodation, the downside of which is the fact that it's the very apartment in which Mio Kurusato is already a resident, and as we've seen in the last episode, as well as beforehand, Kurusu and Kunasato do not get along well at all. But Takuru and Yuto were perfectly willing to, let sleeping dogs lie, if you'll forgive the expression, and try and make the most of their new living arrangements. But that brings us to here, where, clearly Takuru has some things that he needs to discuss. I went to the place Shinjo suggested and was greeted by the same rude waitress as always.
ぼっちか?
For the moment.
いや、その待ち合わせを。
Yeah, she's getting real tired of seeing Takuru's face around this manga cafe. I looked around and saw Shinjo in the back. He was looking out the window and rubbing his stomach. Yeah, he's still, that's quite a case of food poisoning there. Should really have that looked into. I nodded to the waitress and went to sit with him.
Ah, 来たな。
Indeed we are. Punctual this time.
この前はどうもお世話になりました。
ああ、そういうのはいい。それより話ってのは?
Yeah. Conversations aside, we need to talk about a certain someone. Even now I wasn't sure if I should tell Shinjo about Serika. Shinjo frowned.
こちとら商売繁盛でね、仕事が山積みで正直時間が足りないんだよ。こうして過ぎていく一秒一秒の積み重ねだって惜しいわけなんだが。
Indeed. First, the fallout with the trial of Shinji Ito, and now having to deal with the aftermath of Sakuma's murder.
すみません。
Though he has already gone out of his way to help us in our time of need, which we should be grateful for. I looked at Shinjo's cup and saw that it was filled with milk. From the way he was rubbing his stomach, he might be feeling sick. Great observation there. I couldn't call him all the way out here and then just tell him there was nothing. Also remember last time that it was Mio of all people who actually noticed certain discrepancies in Serika's details that put us on the right track as to who she really was and what she was really after. But not in this case. Not this time.
ですね。その
Which in a nutshell basically means that Takuru has his work cut out for him trying to explain the fact that Serika not only is a gigolomaniac herself, but also the one responsible for instigating the return of the new generation madness serial killings to begin with. But how to ask, and apologies for
その
bumping against microphone there.
理由は聞かずに尾上セリカのことを調べてほしいって言ったらやってもらえますか？
It is in the nature and the job description of a detective to ask questions. This isn't going to be so simple. Because as far as Shinjo is concerned, Serika is just the airheaded student of the newspaper club at Hakio Academy. He looked at me appraisingly. Yeah, telling him all this means that he's going to have to write down a report, and if that report even reaches the eyes of his superiors at HQ, it's going to cause a lot more problems for him than we'd like. A moment later, he shook his head a little. He groaned a little chin stubble.
君と尾上さんの間に何があったのかはよく知らないが、こちらもつい先日、狼少年にこっぴどく痛めつけられたばかりだ。理由もなしに警察を動かせと言われてもな。
Well, we're going to have to tell him eventually, I suppose. The boy who cried wolf. We know exactly who he's talking about. It was obvious who he was talking about. I'd seen on the news that Ito had suddenly switched to proclaiming his innocence. Now that he's being no longer manipulated by Sakuma's mind control. Though that once again begs the question of just why Sakuma didn't use his mind control device against Serika as a precaution. Not that that matters now, because he is quite clearly dead. The festivals had gone on at Channel's news board ever since the first report, and the threads were still popping up even now. I could imagine that things were tense at the police station right now, which is the proverbial understatement.
そういうのは本来、探偵やら更新所に頼むべきことだろ。
You mean a detective agency like Freezer Investigations? I see where you're going with this. Clever.
それはそのおっしゃる通りだと思います。
だったら理由くらいは話してもらおうか。
Well, we owe him that much. He's proven himself trustworthy throughout this entire ordeal. What should I do? Even if Shinjo did look into Serika without asking me any questions, if he found something, the result would be the same. But I still couldn't bring myself to tell him from my own lips that Serika might be the killer, even though there is no might be.
しょうがないな。
Shinjo saw that I wasn't going to say anything and sighed.
尾上セリカの身の上を調べりゃいいんだな。
Kind of feel a little bit guilty here myself.
やってもらえるんですか？
乗りかかった船だ。それに今は可能性があるなら何でもやっておきたい。
Going to need to do so if you want this case closed.
理由は？
He's already agreed not to, Takuru. Don't go looking a gift horse in the mouth.
そんなもん今さらどうとでもなるさ。潰れる面目は全部潰しちまったしな。
Indeed. Thanks. Unfortunately to Ito's testimony, but then again, that wasn't his fault, or yours for that matter.
ただし、もしそれによって何か疑わしいことが出てきたら、止められるという保証はないぞ。それでもいいんだな。
Yeah. We're putting Shinjo in a bit of a bind, because if he does anything that alerts Police HQ, it's definitely going to bring problems. I could tell from the way that he spoke he wasn't joking.
はい。
But that's unfortunately the risk that we must take. There was no turning back now. I said it aloud so that I could hear it too. Well, it's better than nothing, I guess.
ただいま。
And back in the apartment.
おかえり。
Kurusu welcomed me with a smile when I opened the door.
タクル兄ちゃん、おかえり。
There's Yuto.
おかえりなさい。
And little Uki. Yuto was sitting at his desk doing schoolwork. Yamazoe seemed to be studying too. Both of them looked up at the same time. I lived with other people at Aoba dorm, but we all had our own rooms. On this instance, though, it felt a little weird to hear "Welcome home" as soon as I walked through the door. But it wasn't a bad feeling at all. At the very least, it's a sign that Yuto and Uki are
頼
doing
まれてた
okay.
の、これでいいんだよな。
ありがとう。
I handed Kurusu the ingredients for dinner that she asked me to pick up before I left. Yeah, it's a good thing we did, because otherwise we wouldn't have anything to eat. And there is absolutely no way that we're sharing a dinner with Mio, or vice versa.
何？
なんでもない。
When you say never mind like that with that expression, it tends to increase the level of worry even more. Kurusu didn't ask where I've been going when I left. I was sure she could guess, especially the fact that if it weren't for Kurusu, we would never have figured out that Serika was the one behind everything, pulling the strings. She probably wanted to know how it had gone, but she wasn't asking for my sake.
それでよかったんだよな。
And on that particular subject, we probably won't be playing house for a long while, because sooner or later we are going to have to confront Serika and Oe. Or perhaps she will confront us.
Eh?
But for right now, We're cooking dinner.
頼まれてた買い物。
こんにゃくとお豆腐と、あれ？ねえタクル、これは？
ユートたちだってたまにはお菓子くらい食べたいだろ。
お菓子？
Yeah. Kurusu might be angry if we go a little bit too overboard, but then again, Takuru does have his point. Yuto and Uki might want a little something to nibble on. Otherwise, they'll just, we won't have so much food left by the time all is said and done. Yuto stood up when he heard the word snacks. His face broke into a huge grin when he saw the value-sized pack of yakats in Kurusu's hands.
やった、チョコレートだ。ありがとうタクル兄ちゃん。ほらウキ姉ちゃん、チョコだよ、チョコ好き？
Yeah. Kurusu's not going to be happy with Takuru about this, but...
ねえのの姉ちゃん、チョコ食べてもいい？お勉強が終わったらね。
Well, that isn't a no.
やったー！早く勉強終わらそう、ウキ姉ちゃん。
Yeah, and they do deserve something to enjoy after everything we've just been through. The two of them sat down at the desk and began to study even harder than before. I know it's bribery and motivation, but
もうダメよタクル。この先私たちの生活もどうなるかわからないんだから無駄遣いしちゃう。
わかってるけど、たかがチョコレートだろ。
たかがの積み重ねがそのうち大きく。
unfortunately Kurusu also does have a point. Then again, Kurusu stopped and shook her head.
そうね。タクルの言う通りかもしれないわね。何事もダメじゃ息が詰まっちゃう。
Yeah, there is frugal and then there is going way too overboard.
こういう時だものね。少しくらい心の余裕がないと。
Yeah, which is precisely why Takuru only bought one value pack set.
クルス？
何？
いや、なんでもない。
It seemed like she'd changed since she'd come here. I was going to say that, but I stopped.
変なの。
When she smiled, it was a little more peaceful than the smile I was used to seeing. Maybe I thought I'd known everything about Kurusu, but I hadn't known anything at all. Perhaps. I got the call from Shinjo that night.
信じたくはないだろうが、まず間違いない。
So he has found something.
そうですか。わかりました。
After I heard what Shinjo had to say, I staggered back to the apartment. Looks like his investigation was right on the money. When I arrived, Kurusu had just gotten out of the bath and was drying her hair with the towel.
タクル、どこ行ってたの？お風呂から上がったらいなくなってるから、ちょっと心配し。
We're going to have to tell Kurusu what we've been up to and why. Yeah, we can't hide this from her.
タクル？
Not that that was ever going to be an option, mind you.
尾上が
I couldn't say the rest of it. Yuto and Yamazoe were asleep. But I didn't want to talk about it in front of them.
タクル。
Kurusu stood up, slowly walked over, and held me tight. I'm starting to get a bad vibe in the back of my mind here. Let's hear it. She slipped her hands around my back and patted me gently like a child. It felt like she'd been doing this all the time lately. But for now, I just wanted to let her do it.
クルス尾上が尾上は
大丈夫よ。今は何も言わなくても。落ち着いてからでいいから。
If only things were that simple.
クルス
Shinjo seemed reluctant when I talked to him, but he had acted fast after I left. The police must have been getting desperate. They wanted to make up for the mistake they'd made with Ito as fast as possible. So what's happened? I suppose we'll find out. Shinjo had persuaded his superiors and gone to Serika's home. I'm surprised he was actually able to get that much, but then again, they're pretty much looking for anything that they can get their hands on right about now. What he'd found there was absolute darkness, both concerning her and everything about her. That's what he'd said. There were signs that Serika Noe had lived there, in that apartment, but there were no signs of her parents, because there aren't any. There was, however, a body. It was the body of the person who had originally lived there. Serika had killed the home's original owner, hid the body, and taken their place. So this wasn't her apartment to begin with. Well, not that that should have been a surprise, but just recalling the fact that last time we were here in this place, we never actually found who this apartment actually belonged to. That's what he said. I wanted to tell him that he must be joking. But we can't, because after all, we ourselves saw firsthand Serika trying to murder Kurusu after Kurusu finally connected the dots together. I wanted to scream that he was lying. I was the one who asked him to do it, and to some degree I'd expected this. But even so, hearing the truth felt like somebody was cutting my heart out with a knife.
私じゃダメ？私じゃダメ？私がセリカの代わりにずっとあなたのそばにいてあげる。それじゃあダメ？
On one level, that isn't the issue here, Nono Kurusu. But on the other hand, for all this time, Takuru Miyashiro has always seen Serika Noe as his childhood friend.
それとも私じゃセリカの代わりにはなれない？
I realized clearly. My home was here. This was where my heart belonged. Here with Yuto and Yamazoe and...
ありがとう。ノノ。
And there it is. For the first time in 6 years, Takuru is called Kurusu by her first name. Which just underscores the gravity of the situation. When I finally said her name, she just nodded without saying a word.
炊飯器でケーキが焼けるなんて知りませんでした。
I didn't know that either. Huh. That makes two of us, surprised, Uki.
実は炊飯器ってご飯が炊けるだけじゃなくていろんなことに使えるのよ。
Must be a multi-purpose rice cooker then. By the way, I never use a rice cooker to cook rice, and this, of course, said rice cooker is just a simple saucepan myself.
のの姉ちゃんそういうの好きだもんね。ほら、チョコレートのいい匂いがしてきたわよ。
I'd only eaten a few hours ago, but the delicious smell was making me hungry again. Nana was in the kitchen, making a cake with Yuto and Yamazoe. Well, at least everyone's happy. That's what matters at this moment. I was leaning up against the wall and half-heartedly watching them. My head was still filled with thoughts of Serika. Shinjo had asked me to meet with him this morning. He had all kinds of questions, but will we be able to answer them? Only time will tell. How did I find out that Serika Noe was involved in the case? Well, we're going to have to drag Kurusu into this, it seems. Where was she now? That question we can't answer until Serika reveals herself. Who was she, anyway? Yeah, unfortunately, Shinjo isn't going to buy the fact that Serika is a real-booted, delusionary existence. Shinjo had said that her family registration itself was fake, and he told me more. Much more, it would seem. There was no sign that she'd ever existed until the time of the Shibuya earthquake 6 years ago. That was impossible, except for a latent gigalomaniac such as yourself. I remembered spending time with her. That was back when she was just an imaginary friend. I could clearly remember going to AH General Hospital to look for Amy with her, and finding Senri Minamisawa in the middle of an experiment. There is one person that can refute that train of thought, Takuru. That is Nono Kurusu herself. Because as we all witnessed, she herself was there when Takuru snuck into the hospital. And I knew for a fact that Senri Minamisawa had been down in that facility before the earthquake. That is true. If she didn't exist, then what were my memories? That is a very good question. But nothing I gave the police ended up being any real help. And there still wasn't a warrant out for Serika's arrest. Which doesn't actually surprise me in the least. The police will be hesitant to issue a warrant for anyone after what happened with Yuto. Yeah, what I just said. They probably decided they couldn't risk treating another minor as the killer and getting it wrong again. Even though they would technically be right, it would ultimately be their word against Serika's, which wouldn't help matters. There was also the question of where Serika came from. Well, she did come from somewhere. That somewhere is none other than the Dirac Sea. If she had no family registration, then she practically didn't exist, and yet now she does. And you couldn't prosecute someone who didn't exist. And on top of all that, there was the fact that the rest of the world still didn't know about the Gigalomaniacs. Even after what happened 6 years ago, really? They were probably being as careful as possible. There is still much that we don't know about Serika, even with all the stuff that we do know about her. I said her name in my mind. She'd been with me forever. She'd always taken my side, which we never thought suspicious. And she'd done all those terrible things for me. But then, just who was she?
Hi, 準備 OK。
これであとは出来上がるのを待つだけですか？
That's usually how cooking works.
そうよ、簡単でしょ。
We just have to make sure that it doesn't get burnt in the process.
ねえねえ、どのくらいで出来上がるの？
Excellent question there, Yuto. Very vital question when it comes to cakes.
そうね、1時間くらいかしら。
1時間か。
Be strong, Yuto.
そうだ、ただ待ってるのも退屈だし、せっかくだからどこか行こうか。
As long as we don't just leave the cake unattended, we should be fine.
いいの？
みんな一緒ならいいんじゃないかしら。ねえ、タクル。
Are you sure you're okay, Kurusu?
Huh?
I wasn't listening.
みんなでどこかに行こうかって言ってたの。
どこかって？
その辺をブラブラよ。ねえ、タクルも行くでしょ？
僕は。
タクル兄ちゃんも行こうよ。いいでしょ？
There wasn't much point in sitting here and being gloomy.
わかった。一緒に行くよ。
Well, looks like it's decided then.
やったー！ ウキ姉ちゃん準備しよう。
Yuto was really excited. I've been keeping him inside lately out of fear that Serika might come. He was probably eager to get out of the house. Maybe it would be a good change of pace. Still worried about leaving that cake unattended though. That is a potential fire risk. Nano, Yuto, and Uki came back holding cones piled high with ice cream. The color of the ice cream was so bright it stung my eyes. How bright is that ice cream?
はい、これタクルの分。
Yeah, better eat it before it melts. She offered me one that was glistening with a thick coating of chocolate.
Arigatou.
And now we, yeah. You know what? I'm not going to say anything further actually, to be honest, because this is where this episode of Let's Play ChäoS Child is going to end. And when we return, adventurers, we shall see what the rest of the day brings us. As always, until next we meet.